Casser-Jayne Show. Let's talk. And I am Halli Casser-Jayne. Welcome to my listeners in the United States and around the world. Tune in to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show at hallicasserjayne.com. Today on the show, I visit with two crime writers. Up first, perennial New York Times bestselling author Sarah Paretsky, out with her latest thriller, Fallout, already on its way to number 1 on the bestseller list. And author and Fox News anchor John Hook, here to talk about his titillating look at the unsolved murder of Hogan's Heroes star Bob Crane, and his provocative new book, Who Killed Bob Crane? Murder, Mayhem, Sex. Let's get to it. In her first novel for William Morrow, Fallout, Sarah Paretsky is back with our favorite investigator, V.I. Warshawski, but in a completely new kind of mystery that will take Vic out of Chicago and into Kansas, searching for answers that time and prejudice may long have erased. At the request of her cousin's goddaughter, Bernadine, V.I. is on the trail of a vanished film student and a faded Hollywood star. August vanished and is now the prime suspect in a drug-related ransacking of a local gym. But Bernie suspects that he's only the suspect because he's black and not around to defend himself. As V.I. tries to track him down, she realizes that this isn't as straightforward as it seems, especially since former Hollywood legend Emerald Fairing is with him. Accompanied by her beloved dog Peppy, V.I. tracks her quarry through a university town, across fields where missile silos once flourished, and into a past driven by long-simmering racial tensions, a past that holds the key to the mysteries of the present. What can a middle-aged woman's psychological ravings have to do with a protest from the 1980s? And why doesn't anyone want V.I. asking questions about what happened in town for the last 50 years? As the mysteries accumulate, so does the body count. And in this, her toughest case, not even V.I. is safe. Suspenseful and provocative, witty and intelligent, reviewers say Fallout is Sarah Paretsky and V.I. Warshawski working at the height of their powers. Peretsky, just in case you don't know, is the New York Times bestselling author of 19 previous novels and is one of only 4 living writers to receive both the Grand Master Award from the Mystery Writers of America and the Cartier Diamond Dagger from the Crime Writers Association. Let's talk. Hi there, Sarah.
Hi.
How are you today?
Good. How are you?
Oh, I'm great, darling. Really nice to have you here on the show. I've been wanting to talk to you for a long, long time. First question. Why did you give your protagonist such a difficult name I can't even pronounce it when I go to read it? Why not Jane Doe?
It used to be published in England by a woman whose family was Polish, and she made the same complaint. She said, no one here can say that name or any of the other names in your book. I guess what I wanted was Chicago, people identify themselves so tightly with their racial and ethnic backgrounds, and it was a real eye-opener to me coming from Kansas, where people don't have those kinds of hyphenated identities.
Yeah, I'm a hyphenated identity, by the way.
Say what?
I said I'm a hyphenated woman.
Well, I think all women are. You know, it's like if you're a writer, you're a white man. So you're a female writer, you're a white woman. You're a black female writer. You're
true.
a black lesbian female writer.
So
Yes,
true.
indeed. The hyphens get longer and longer.
I love it. I love it. Welcome to the new world, right? Listen to me. You've been writing for a very long time, and it's interesting to me because you write about this female detective, and I'm just wondering if when you started, this surely was true, if it's still true, that you have to be a whiskey-drinking, baseball-loving, gun-toting, karate-loving, bigger-than-life character to be believable, at least endearing to readers, to buy the idea that a woman can be an ace, investigator. How has that changed since the days you started writing?
Oh, I think that we're seeing women play all kinds of different roles in all kinds of different ways. Society sure has a long way to go, but we've come a distance too, and having some acceptance for women who do things in many different ways. I will say that my detective, V.I. Warshawski, is a whiskey-drinking, baseball-loving woman because I am a whiskey-drinking, baseball-loving woman. I'm a terrible athlete, but I grew up going to a country school in eastern Kansas where we all played baseball, And I loved it, and I still love baseball.
And I still love baseball, too, and my Yankees are winning. 7 or 8 in a row, I think, how the Cubs do, or the, right? I love it.
We had one good year with the Cubs last year, and
right.
Now they're back below 500.
Right.
So
yeah.
reality returns with 2017.
I think I identify with you, though, because I'm a whiskey-drinking, kind of tough, baseball-loving kind of gal, and I guess that's why I've always loved your books, because I love your character, and I know that I love you. I find you the most interesting woman writing these days, I have to tell you. Are you read by as many? Well, it's true, because I think what comes through in the books is you. And that doesn't always happen with writers, but, you have to have a personality in order to be able to place that personality within the framework of your characters. So, your parents did a good job. They built somebody who's got, lots of character. I love character. Many women as men read your books. Do you know what the breakdown is on that?
Well, in general, women read about 65% of the fiction that's sold, and men read about 65% of the nonfiction that's sold. And that's really pretty much how my readership breaks down, too.
Do you take that into... I was going to ask you if you take that into consideration when you're writing.
I can't really think about who's reading the books. When I do, I start to freeze. My readers are very generous. They respond to me and to my work, and then I start thinking, oh my God, this book isn't going to work. They're going to be disappointed, and then I can't write. So I have to kind of shut off thinking about readers while I'm writing, or I get too tense to write.
I hear you. Fallout. Let's talk Fallout. Let's talk the fact that this is a bit of a departure. This is a departure for you. You take your character away from her home base. But why now? Why did you decide to do that now?
I had wanted to go revisit the Kansas of my own childhood for a long time, but I didn't have the right kind of story to do it with. And then for some reason, I started thinking my dad was a cell biologist at the University of Kansas, and he was kind of on the fringes of the bioweapons world back then. He went to Czechoslovakia to a conference on his organism, which the Russians were trying to weaponize. And he got a scientist in the Czech lab to inject him with the strain that they were weaponizing so that he could bring it home and study it. And he got off the plane in Kansas City with a fever of 104, but he didn't start antibiotics until his lab tech came and took a blood sample that he could culture. And, I think about this a lot. I think I never asked him why he did it. It seems like out of a sci-fi movie in a way. Was he obsessed? Was he insane? Was he thumbing his nose at authority, which he certainly loved to do, showing that he could smuggle a virus past Russian guards? But when I wanted to try to write in that bioweapons world, I could only imagine it in the Kansas of my childhood. I knew I could have done it in Chicago or in Illinois, but it just didn't come to life to me until I thought, got to get her to Kansas, got to get her dealing with this.
So much in here, so much meat to this story, but also in your childhood. You had an interesting childhood, Jewish, in a place that didn't like Jews at the time. You had to grow up on a farm away from the whatever. I can relate to that. And then you go back and you pick this up. And I'm wondering what happens when, as a writer, your past comes into your creative present.
That was a serious challenge, Halli, and one that took me a long time to sort out. I was, at first, the way you do, I was making everything line up with exactly how it had been, my family, my childhood, my school, and so on. And then I finally realized that was giving me very wooden characters and a very dull storyline. So I threw all that out and started again, making everything up, not the town, not the town's history, but everything is fictionalized. The churches that play a role in that town, I've made those up. The librarian who plays a heroic role is loosely on heroic librarians all over America, but she's totally a fictional character. And the family that is a sort of a stand-in for my own family, all of those people are completely fictional. And once I did that, then the story started coming to life.
So that for you, the truth is in the fiction. How interesting. I love it.
I think in a way it is. I think I really do believe this, Halli. I really believe that you get closer to the truth with fiction than you do with trying to write facts, because the truth is an emotional state as much as it is, or maybe more than it is, a factual state. And through fiction and through stories, the stories that we humans have been telling each other since the dawn of time, it's the only way that we can make sense of this weird, wild world that we live in.
So for you, is writing, or the process of writing and the creative aspects, is it to help you work through some issues, that in your heart, in your mind, in your soul?
Yes, I would say so, although often I don't know what I'm working through until the book is done. And then I'm surprised. I mean, like Fallout ended up being a lot more about the history of race in Middle America than I was intending to do when I started the book, and yet that is kind of there all the time under the surface, and so it plays a dominant role in the story that I wasn't thinking of. It's that kind of thing. I've written books that tell me that I was working out an issue within my family or within my marriage that I didn't know was going on until after the book was done and I went back and read it.
Isn't that fascinating how that works? I love that. Listen to me. You're amazing. I love going to your blog, and everybody should go there because she posts things every once in a while that really get you stirred up. You're an activist, a political activist. There's no question about it. And there are a lot of people who would stay away, who are in your career, doing what you do, reaching out to so many people who may not agree with you politically, but yet you go out there and you stand up for what you believe. I love that. Are you afraid to project? Do you think about it? Do you go, oh, the hell with it. I'm going to say what I need to say because this is who I am, like it, lump it or don't. What?
I do worry about it, and yet I think of the writers who are my heroes, the people who did take a stand, and I guess I don't want to be found wanting in the end. I don't believe in political novels, novels that are just written to make a political point. I mean, there's a reason that the books from Russia that we love are like Dr. Zhivago, not Spring and the Victory Collective Farm. Books that are only written to make a point are really, really dull, one-dimensional stories. But the things that are engaging me in the moment, they end up, that's the context that I'm writing in, and so I can't help having them end up in the pages of what I write.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I want to talk to you about writing crime fiction. It takes a certain kind of mind. And tell us what attributes you think you have that best serve you, that make your book so eminently readable and so popular with your public. What do you think is the key for you?
I think that living with a certain amount of fear, I mean, don't we all live with a certain amount of fear? Maybe crime writers have turned to writing crime fiction because we're more fearful than the population at large. But I want to see some kind of justice done, even on a small scale. Even if I can't do big justice, my detective can't fix everything that's wrong in the world around her, but she can bring some measure of peace to some troubled people. And if I didn't feel that was possible in the real world as well as on the page, I just couldn't keep going. And so for me, crime fiction, there are people who write very witty, entertaining novels, and I love reading that kind of, Carl Hyacin, I love reading his stuff. But I want some sense that some people can have their lives made whole, that it isn't just always going to end in despair and tragedy.
If you hadn't been a crime writer, what would you have been?
Oh, gosh, I'd be a physical therapist and going out and healing people.
How perfect. How perfect. I love it. You can do both. Listen to me. It's true. 20 books or so you're at right now, right? 20 plus?
Yes.
Oh, my God. I mean, girlfriend, that's just amazing to me. I'm not going to ask you which is your favorite, but I am going to ask you how you felt when you finished Fallout.
I think at the end of any book, there's a feeling of it's not so much finished, it's more just I can't figure out how to make it better, and so I'd better draw a line and hope that people don't notice all the chewing gum that I've used to stick it together. But I'm not going to give away the ending because there's a chase scene that I think is kind of unique in Fallout, and VI gets saved in a way that I was a little worried. I thought this is going to seem too goofy. So when I got to the end and had it all the little pieces that needed to be wrapped up, I guess it was the little things that made me happy. There's a scene at the very end where she stops in a small town and has some really meaningful connection with a woman who's been grieving her brother's death. And then she goes home and her friends whom she's missed, she's been terribly lonely. There they all are waiting to greet her and have Thanksgiving with her, and that just felt very good to me.
Oh, that's good. So one last question. I love your character, VI. I mean, oh my God. I relate to this woman. I have from the day, and I'm watching her grow over the years. I've been reading the books. So my question is this. She's
so flattered.
Well, it's true. I only do interviews with people I like their work. I don't do any others. So I tend to rant and rave about the good ones. What can I tell you? It's good. It's good. People should read more, and good fiction is hard to find these days. But all that being said, she sleeps in the nude. Do you?
I used to when I was younger. Now I get too cold at night. So I have this nice T-shirt that will please you to know I sleep in a long T-shirt that has a picture of the Statue of Liberty embracing a woman in a hijab, and it says, "No ban, no wall." And that's what I go to bed in.
And that is so you. Thank you so much. Nice to have you here.
Thanks, Halli. Thanks a lot.
All right. Bye-bye. I've been speaking with New York Times bestselling crime writer Sarah Paretsky. Her new book, the first to be published by William Morrow, is Fallout. For more information on Sarah and her books, or to read her blog, visit saraparetsky.com. You were listening to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. My guests today are perennial New York Times bestselling author Sarah Paretsky and Fox News anchor and author John Hook. Tune in to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show at hallicasserjayne.com. We'll be back in a minute. Stay with us.
A message from the American Podcast Council.
You and I know why podcasting is so wonderful, but in a recent survey, 45% of Americans indicated they're unaware of the term podcasting. Think about it. 45%. People just like you, living unaware. It's as if the term podcasting was just a word, like Folgenblurble, or mocking turf, or schleen. People in your community need help. All this month, we want you to find a friend, a relative, a curious stranger. Show them how to try podcasts. Then share your story on something called Twitter with the hashtag TryPod. That's TRYPod. Together we can delete podcast unawareness. Won't you help? That's TRYPod.
Hogan's Heroes. To a certain generation of TV watchers, the sitcom Hogan's Heroes conjures up a host of images, many of them the faces of the beloved star of the series. Set in the unlikely setting of a German prison camp, the black comedy featured the talent of such veteran actors as Werner Klemperer, John Banner, Richard Dawson, who would become a beloved game show host of Family Feud, and award-winning actor Bob Crane, who starred as Colonel Robert E. Hogan, coordinating an international crew of Allied prisoners running a special operations group from the camp. Crane's epitaph might have read, award-winning star of celebrated sitcom. But when the series ended, Crane's career declined. The once adored star took to the road, starring in plays nationwide. It was while he was on tour for the play Beginner's Luck in June 1978, Crane was found bludgeoned to death in a Scottsdale apartment, a murder that today remains officially unsolved. Crane's tawdry personal life, that of a sex-addicted deviant who had learned the wonders of home video and descended into a life of strip clubs, BDSM, and a closet homosexual exposed for his fans to see. A suspect, a trial, an acquittal. The mystery went on to spawn hundreds of articles, books, and movies over the past 4 decades. And there the story remained, yet another Hollywood cold case, until, that is, a veteran news reporter and television anchor for over 30 years in Arizona, who has won more than a dozen Emmys for his reporting, but was just 18 when Crane was murdered, had his interest in the case rekindled following an interview with Crane's son, Robert Jr. It was that interview that sparked the idea to retest the blood evidence using modern DNA science. John Hook's journey to the heart of this mystery is chronicled in his new book, Who Killed Bob Crane, with a foreword by Robert Crane, Jr. Let's talk.
Okay, John, this really is a story. I mean, in the intro, I gave some background on Bob Crane, mostly, of course, focused on Hogan's Heroes, but who was he really? Where was he from? Give us a little background on this guy.
He was a middle-class Connecticut kid, Halli, and he grew up in a fairly religious home, actually. He was an altar boy. And, you know, you could dive into the psyche of somebody and figure out what would push them into the world he ended up in, which was a lot of pornography and videotaping his sexual exploits. And some of that may come from a repressed childhood. That's you know, really for a shrink to decide, but reading between the lines, there may have been some of that involved. Crane was not a great student. He was average. He really loved the drums. He became a very accomplished drummer at a young age and even drummed for the symphony in Connecticut. But they didn't think he was serious enough, so he ended up out of that world. And he starts dabbling in radio. And radio fit his personality. He was a guy who loved to laugh. He loved to tell jokes. He loved to have fun. He loved music. He loved spinning records. So all of this fit into what became a dynamic morning personality, first in Connecticut and New York, small markets, Hornell, New York, Greenwich, Connecticut, Bristol, Connecticut. And then the executives at CBS in New York were kind of scratching their heads saying, who's this guy in Connecticut who's siphoning off our listeners from the mothership at CBS Radio in New York? Who is this Crane guy? So they decide, you know, we got to get this guy out of our area of dominant influence and ship him off somewhere. We're going to take him out to the coast. I'm talking about the left coast, California. He goes out to L.A. They give him a job at KNX in Los Angeles, and he becomes a huge radio personality. And that's how Bob Crane got rolling with a madcap morning show. That's how he got noticed. That's how producers in Hollywood first took notice.
At this time, he's married to his childhood sweetheart? Is that
yes?
Right.
Ann Terzian. Yes.
Okay, and they had children together.
They had Bob Jr., who
right.
wrote the foreword for my book, Who
right.
Killed Bob Crane, and they had 2 daughters later. Yes.
Okay, so now he gets the big gig, Hogan's Heroes, and everybody loves Bob Crane, right? I mean, guy did a great job. The show was quirky and wonderful. So talk to me about this. Then he starts cheating on his wife? What?
Well, this may have started, Bob Jr. told me he felt that this probably started back in the mid-'50s, right around the time they left for California. California exposed Bob Crane to not only the beautiful and wonderful topography that California is all about, but beautiful women. And he started seeing and gaining access to women that, you know, he could have only dreamed about. I mean, he would have Jane Mansfield on his morning show. He would have starlets on his morning show. And Bob Crane got exposed to this, and he had already been dabbling in pornography, no question about that, and started probably with Polaroids, taking Polaroids of some of his sexual conquests. So yes, he was cheating on his wife. He was hanging around at strip clubs. After the radio show, sometimes it would not be uncommon for him to go to a strip club and play drums at the strip club. Now this encompassed all of Bob Crane's wildest fantasies. He was playing drums, playing music, and hanging around naked women. This was nirvana for him. And, you know, he was definitely cheating on his wife, yes.
Okay. And I think this is important because the interesting thing to me about this whole story is it's told, clearly we want to know the forensics. We want to know who shot whom, you know, and all that jazz. Right. But I don't think you can tell the story without looking also equally at him, as well as who we'll talk about, who, you know, we think, or you think, and a couple of people think did it, you know, the unanswerable. But so I think it's important, and, you know, not for the salacious nature of it, although it certainly is, And isn't that
Right.
always juicy and fun? But I think it's relevant to go down that road with him. So he cheats with one of his co-stars, Cynthia Lynn, and then he gets involved with Patricia Olson, who becomes his wife, right? And,
That's right.
okay.
Yeah, and there were many others too. I mean, Crane was dabbling, especially when he got an opportunity. He would seize it. He was kind of a one-woman guy. That's how he described himself. But at the same time, you know, he was getting access to women, and he would bed women if he could. He and John Carpenter, who we'll talk about, were very similar in that respect. Crane had more restraint than Carpenter did. But Crane, I think what you're getting at is that this was a very risky lifestyle that this guy was starting to lead, and he was taking chances. And this was also starting to hurt his career as Hogan's progressed, because it became known in Hollywood that Crane was bedding many women and videotaping this stuff. And this became more than just kind of a passing thing. This was becoming a compulsion, and it was becoming known to people in Hollywood, and it was turning some people off, frankly.
And imagine if that was today with TMZ and everything else. Oh my God,
man.
right?
I mean, this, you know, Bob Crane, you can say a lot of things about him, but many people would suggest that he was ahead of his time.
Right.
He was doing selfies and sex tapes long before Kim Kardashian or Paris Hilton or any number of these stars who have made big money at this. The difference would be, Halli, is that Bob Crane never intended for this stuff to go public. Never.
I don't think most people do, other than Kim Kardashian mama. But then,
Great point.
So anyway,
Great point.
so after Hogan's Heroes canceled, after its long successful run, his star starts to fade, and he got
Hollywood story, right?
Right. I'm nothing new there. He goes on the road doing stage productions, and what? And sex addiction kind of gets more and more.
Well, just like any rock star, and you've interviewed many of them, you're on stage for 2 hours. There's a build up to the show for maybe an hour and a sound check before that, and then you've got a lot of hours to fill. And some people fill it with booze, some people fill it with drugs. Bob Crane filled that void with sex. And out on the road, he was a kid in a candy store. As Bob Crane Jr. told me, he was living like a frat boy. And he's in his late 40s at this point. He had to go out on the road, Halli, because he needed to pay the bills. Some of the stuff was drying up. He'd been typecast as Colonel Hogan. This became a bit of a problem, yet he rode the fame and celebrity of that everywhere he went. He'd walk into a bar, people would scream out, "Hogan, Hogan!" He was well known, and this show was in huge rerun rotation in the late 70s, into the 80s, into the 90s, and even now. But Crane in the late 70s, when he was out on the road doing dinner theater, he couldn't go anywhere without somebody knowing who he was and asking for an autograph. He was a big, big star.
And it's addictive, and it's hard to give up. And it does all sorts of crazy things to everybody who loses it. You know, the big...
Yeah, I mean, you look at the people who've kept it somewhat together, and it's not easy to do. It is not easy to do, and you could count them on maybe a couple of hands, the people with immense stardom who've somehow kept some equanimity and kept their life together. It's not easy to do.
No. So June 1978, Crane was living in the Winfield Place apartments in Scottsdale, Arizona. And on the afternoon of June 29th, what happened?
His co-star, Victoria Berry from Beginner's Luck, which was what brought Crane to Scottsdale. He'd been traveling all over the country with this show for several years. He was not only the star of the play, but he was also directing it. And he became kind of the man who was overseeing the whole production. He liked that. On that particular day, Victoria Berry, his co-star, it was only a 4-person play, playing at the Windmill Dinner Theater in Scottsdale. They're in their final week of the run of this play. Victoria Berry goes over to Crane's apartment at about 2:15 in the afternoon to ostensibly do an overdub for a scene out of the play that had been shot, ironically, by John Carpenter earlier in the week. We can get into Carpenter and Crane and how they met, but they had shot a scene from the play. Victoria Berry was looking for other work in Hollywood, and there was a problem with the audio, and they were going to overdub her part, try to get the sound to match. That's the story. Crane and Berry had slept together twice before. She also had a boyfriend out in L.A. Crane obviously was divorcing Patricia Valdes, Sigrid Valdes, Patty Olson, and so he's in limbo. She goes over to his apartment, knocks on the door. There's no answer. This is 2:15 in the afternoon. It's over 100 degrees in Scottsdale. She's knocking on the door. She sees the paper on the front, of the doorstep, and she picks it up. And she's thinking, well, his car is here. Bob's got to be here. He's probably out by the pool and back. She's knocking on the door. Bob, Bob. And just reflexively, she turns the handle on the door and it opens. And she's shocked because Bob always locked his door. She thinks, okay, he's probably out and back at the pool. He liked to sun himself out there, get a tan. She opens up the door and the apartment is pitch dark. She makes her way through the apartment straight ahead to the Arcadia door that looks out on the pool. No one is there. In fact, the pool's under repair at the time. She ducks back in, takes a right, pushes open the bedroom door, and she sees a form lying in the bed. She thinks it's a woman because there are these long, dark streaks of what she believed was hair. It turns out those streaks were blood coming from Bob Crane's head. At this point, she thinks it's a woman. She believes a woman has taken her own life with a gun. She sees the blood, lets out a scream, takes a closer look, thinks it might be a man. She's not sure. She thinks it might be Bob or it might be his close friend, John Carpenter. That's how close Crane and Carpenter were, that she would have thought Carpenter might have killed himself in Crane's bed. She didn't know what was going on. She runs out of the apartment. They call the police and fire arrives. Police arrive. And we come to realize it took a while that it was Bob Crane in that bed, bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. A brutal, brutal killing.
And around his neck?
Tied a video power cord from the camera in the living room.
Unbelievable. Now let's talk about John Carpenter, who was Mr. Carpenter.
Yes. Carpenter's an interesting guy because Crane met Carpenter on the set of Hogan's Heroes in the mid-'60s, introduced, by the way, by Richard Dawson, who played Peter Newkirk on the show. Richard Dawson introduces Carpenter to Crane. The reason Carpenter becomes an interesting figure in all of this is that Carpenter was the first video salesman, national video salesman for Sony Electronics. He was one of the first guys with access to video cameras, home video equipment. He was starting to introduce the well-heeled in Hollywood to this new technology. Red Skelton, Elvis, by the way, other people, other notables, the Smothers Brothers, people he introduced to this technology, showed them how to work this equipment. It was bulky, big, bulky equipment. And so Richard Dawson introduces Carpenter to Crane on the set of Hogan's, and they become kind of fast buddies. They share a fascination with photography, with women, and electronics. Those were the things that bound these two. So they would go out and pick up women, and as time went on, especially once they hit the dinner theater circuit and Crane was on the road, with unencumbered by anything, he supplied Crane with this video equipment that was not easy to get, by the way, in the early 60s and mid-60s. You couldn't get this stuff by going to a store. Carpenter had it, and he used that to gain access to the rich and famous, in this case, Crane. He supplies Crane with this video technology, and the two on the road, Crane would go out on the road for dinner theater, and Carpenter would meet him at least once a month to do work, apparently, but there was no work done. Carpenter would go to these cities and not do any work, really. He would mainly hang around, cat around with Bob Crane after the performance of Beginner's Luck. They'd try to pick up women. They'd try to take them back to Crane's apartment where the array of video equipment was set up, and they would have sex with women and videotape it. Carpenter as the kind of the operator, the camera operator. And he would get seconds on all of this stuff. And this is how they operated. But by the summer of 1978, there's evidence that Crane was growing tired of Carpenter hanging around, that Crane had become very good at running this equipment on his own. He didn't need Carpenter anymore. He could do it himself. And he just didn't need this guy hanging around. And that's where the fissure was that police believe started to really open up during that trip to Scottsdale.
In the interest of time, he becomes the suspect. There is not an immediate trial, right? It took some years for them to get him to trial.
16 years.
Right.
There were two prosecutors that passed on it. Let me go back on as to why John Carpenter became such a central figure in the murder case. The day that Bob Crane turns up dead in his apartment, John Carpenter leaves. He'd been in town. He had been in an apartment, a hotel down the street from Bob Crane's apartment, and had left that morning hastily by all accounts. Left his rental car, turned in his rental car, and went back to California. And then, while investigators are in Crane's apartment, the phone rings, and it's John Carpenter. This is John Carpenter. I'm looking for Bob. Well, Bob's not here, and they put him off. And Carpenter started to say, hey, I'm in L.A. I just let him know I'm back. I've been here. Everything's fine. And he was trying to, according to police, establish a timeline, that he was starting to create an alibi and was also sniffing around for evidence as to what police were onto and how far they might be in the investigation. The big one, though, was the next day, the day after the murder. They find John Carpenter's rental car because they become suspicious, and in his rental car, they find blood on the passenger side of John Carpenter's rental car, a 1978 Chrysler Cordoba. That blood, as they test it, comes back B positive, Bob Crane's blood type. They're thinking, okay, wait a minute. This guy is his friend. He leaves quickly, heads to L.A. He's one of the last people to see Crane alive, and now there's blood in his car. You can imagine, he vaults up the list of possible suspects. And that's how Carpenter became the focus of police. And frankly, they have never left that position for 40 years. The investigators in this case believe Carpenter was Bob Crane's killer.
Why did it take so long to bring him to trial?
2 prosecutors passed on this case, Hallie, because they did not feel that they had it. They had blood in the car. That's interesting, and it's the same blood type as the victim. But nobody could place John Carpenter at the murder scene. There was no murder weapon ever found. There was no murder weapon with prints on it. They interrogated Carpenter twice on audio tape, once in Scottsdale, once in L.A. They even interviewed him another time in L.A., the first time, where they started asking him about even the blood in the car. He never cracked. There was no confession. They just didn't, these 2 prosecutors did not feel they had it. And so it took a new prosecutor elected in 1988, Rick Romley, who came in and said, let's take another look at this case. This case deserves some finality. Let's figure out what's going on here. They reopen the case, they take it from square one, and they arrive right back where they were in 1978, that John Carpenter is the guy. And they finally put him on trial in 1994. So the jury, right from the get-go, had issues with this because they're thinking, why did it take so long to bring this guy to trial? It was an uphill climb.
Okay, so he is acquitted. And I want to establish here that to the day that he died, he said he didn't do it, in fairness to him.
That's right.
So let's just get that on the thing. Okay, now let's talk about John Hook with the great voice. John, you're 18 years old when this is going on. You're just a little pup yourself. What gets you into this story?
I grew up with this guy. Bob Crane was on the television from the time I can remember television. I was 5 years old when that show hit the air. And it was a huge smash, and I vaguely remember it, kind of as vaguely as I remember seeing the Beatles on Sullivan and then later appearances. It's kind of that thing. It's there, but it's foggy. But as I grew up and I got older, I started seeing this in rerun, and I thought the guy was absolutely hilarious. I thought the show was amazing. Set in a Allied prisoner of war camp. It's crazy. The bumbling Germans is a hilarious storyline. By the way, this is a very popular show in Germany, believe it or not. They think it's hilarious and still do. So he was with me all along. And then I head out to Arizona State University when I'm 18. And I get out there and realize that Bob Crane was killed right up the road a month before I arrived in Tempe, Arizona. He was killed 7 miles up the road in Scottsdale, 7 miles from my dormitory. And so, again, full circle. There's Crane, part of my life. And then I interview his son, fast forward to 2016. I interview his son, Bob Jr., for what was going to be kind of a one-off. We were going to do an interview with him about his book, about his father, and that would be that. But after that interview, for days afterwards, I was just kept thinking about this case and thinking about it, mainly driven by the fact that Bob Crane's son did not have any finality, no closure. I hate that word. He hates it too. But they didn't really know for sure who killed their father. I'm speaking about the whole family. And I just thought it was terribly unfair. And as I thought about it more and more, I just got this crazy idea, where's the evidence? If we could find it, if it still existed, and I believed it would still be around because Carpenter was found not guilty, so the case is technically open. I thought the evidence has got to be around. If we can find it, can we get the blood evidence? And if we can get the blood evidence, can we retest it using modern DNA science that might give us an answer they couldn't get in the late 80s and early 90s when they were testing this stuff to prepare to put John Carpenter on trial?
Yeah,
that was the predicate.
It's fascinating. Let me digress for a second because there are a couple of things
Sure.
I want. Lots of kids in this Crane family, and I was nosing around a little bit, and it's interesting to me. I mean, there's some crazy here too. I don't want this to be all black and white. There's some gray areas here. At one point there was a website talking about Crane had penile implant, blaming.
Oh, yeah.
There's blaming Crane's second wife or third wife. I can't keep track of which was which. Second wife, that she did it because she wanted the money, that she was going to, the money, this, that, and the other thing. I want to, and I don't know where each kid is on all of this and what kind of relationships the kids from the different marriages have. I just want to throw that out there just because I think it muddies the waters a little bit and brings in the gray. So that it's because I don't think we want a black and white story, because I don't think there is any such thing as a black and white story. Okay, so now you do.
And this one certainly isn't. I mean, there are as many theories about what happened to Bob Crane as the Kennedy assassination. I'm not kidding. That is not hyperbole. That is the truth.
Is that because, after you did all this research, is that because you think that there really are that many things, or do you think people just pop off on all of this because it's a whodunit and there was never really an answer?
Yeah, there was never someone convicted of the crime, so that leaves it wide open, right? Could they have gotten it wrong? And I will tell you, I still have my own doubts about this, and the reason I have those doubts is because when we did the blood and we retested the blood evidence, the stains off of John Carpenter's rental car, the idea was that the blood in the car was from Bob Crane. And if there's blood in John Carpenter's car, not from somebody type B positive, but from Bob Crane, that is almost a lock that John Carpenter killed him, and that the blood was probably deposited from the murder weapon that he took in the rental car to dump it, driving away from the murder scene. I mean, it makes sense. A lot of times in these things, the easiest explanation, the simplest explanation is often right. But in this case, what we got back was not Bob Crane's DNA. And that really does raise a question in my mind about, is it possible that there is someone unknown to police that they missed? I mean, we've had this happen before. It is possible. I don't give it a high probability, but it is possible.
Does Carpenter have family?
Carpenter's wife still remains in Los Angeles, and he's got a son from an earlier marriage that testified at trial, testified that John Carpenter his father had a anger problem, and that he would sometimes almost get in a blackout kind of state where he became obsessed with taking out whoever was causing him problems. The idea here being that if Bob Crane was severing the relationship with John Carpenter in the summer of '78, that might have been reason enough, almost like a jilted lover, that he was feeling like Crane was discarding him after all their time together, throwing him away like a piece of trash, and he snapped. That's the police theory. But I'll tell you, people who've read my book, a lot of them, one of the first questions they ask, they say, would this have been enough for a guy to murder his best friend? Just to say, hey, I don't want to hang out with you as much anymore, or I don't want to hang out with you at all. Would that have been enough? Would that have been enough of a motive for murder? A lot of people ask me that question, and it's a great question. I don't have an answer for that.
Well, now there are other aspects to it, because there are some who think that they were involved in a gay relationship,
right? So
that it became much more emotional than just two guys having fun doing their little shtick together.
Right. Right. And that has never been proven, but there has been speculation about this. Bob Jr., who's a very open guy, he's lived his whole life in Hollywood. He said, "Now, my dad was heterosexual through and through." He's the kind of guy who would not have a problem saying, yeah, I think Dad may have had a relationship with Carpenter. I think, he was asked this early on by police, and he said, no, my dad is hetero through and through. But you never know, right? You never really know for sure.
There is something else. When Robert Jr. was, 16 years old, his father was telling him all about the crazy sex trip that he was on?
Yes.
Now, that's weird. Come on.
It is. Bob Crane's idea of the talk, the birds and the bees talk, was to show his son, Bob Jr., pornographic videotapes. I mean, it's a little odd, no doubt. And Bob Jr.
I would use a better word. I haven't interjected this whole time. I'm going to use a different word than a little odd. I mean, there's perversion there to have that conversation with the son, and I think that's very telling too. I mean, this guy, and by the way, it wasn't just filming sex. I mean, there was what do they call that? What's his name?
Erotic asphyxiation. information, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there was that going on too, from what I read.
I have never again seen evidence of that in any of the police documents, but I know that there has been wild speculation about what went on. The one thing that should be made clear here is that the women who were on these videotapes, people have said, well, did he secretly tape them? Everything I've seen, and I have seen a lot of this for research purposes only. No, sure, I'm curious like anyone else, Hallie.
Honey, I'm going to that website big time.
Right. So I looked at this stuff. These women are all mugging for the camera. They all know they're on video because this stuff was so big and bulky, you could not miss it in the living room of Crane's apartment. The stuff looked like it fell off a Soyuz space capsule. I mean, it really did. It's huge and bulky, and the TV set was actually turned to the couch where all the shenanigans was going on, and women could see themselves performing, and they were mugging for the camera. I never saw evidence of anybody videotaped without their consent. Now, the only thing that would fly in the face of that is whether some of these women were too drunk to know the difference. That is possible.
Or
in
drugged.
some of these cases.
Right, or drugged. Okay, so you really you refound the evidence. You have the DNA tested because it's a long time between early DNA and this. This is way after OJ and what happened. And then you did something that I think was kind of interesting. So you decided to have this great reveal. Yes,
because this started as a television story. I work for Fox 10 Phoenix and have for many, many years, 24 years, I think now. We were working on a television story, and about a quarter of the way into it, I turned to my photographer, Joe Tillman, and I said, Joe, this has got to be a book, man. There is so much going on. I cannot possibly put this all in a television story. And that's where the book kind of started from. And yes, the only way, Hallie, and it's cheesy. I know it sounds cheesy, and we try to do it with some dignity. But I thought when we get the test results back from Bodie Cellmark Forensics, which is one of the best labs in the world for this kind of stuff. They did the testing on JonBenet Ramsey, on O.J. Simpson, on Bob Crane early on. I thought, we can't pull all of these people together and individually, one by one, tell them the results and interview them without it leaking out. It's going to leak out. And I thought, well, it kind of undermines our story and all the work if it gets leaked out to the press at large before we ever run the story. The only way I could see to do this was to assemble everybody on one evening, which we did. The prosecutor, Rick Romley, the investigator, Barry Vassell, Bob Crane Jr., John Carpenter's attorney, Stephen Avila in California, and the jury foreman, Michael Lake. We assembled them all in the studio and revealed the results to them and to the world that one night. The danger in that, of course, and I talk about it in the book, would people think that this was some kind of Maury Povich stunt, right? That
or Geraldo.
And I have to tell you, I take full credit, good or bad. I went to my news director. I said, I've got an idea. I don't know what you think. I said, I can't come up with any other way that we can do this without it leaking out, except revealing it live on television. Well, he loved it. He loved the idea.
Oh, well, sure. Why not? Yeah.
It's actually not crazy about it, even though I'd come up with the idea. But I couldn't come up with another way to do it. I couldn't come up with another way.
And then there was the big reveal.
Yes.
Should we talk about the big reveal, or should we leave it?
No, we could talk about it. It was shocking. It was shocking. And everyone connected to the case expected that this was going to be Bob Crane's blood in John Carpenter's car, case closed. Now, I'll tell you something. I felt so strongly about this that the working title of the book as I was writing it was The Bob Crane Murder, Case Closed. I felt that strongly that that's what we were going to get. That is not what we got. We got DNA from an unknown male in that car and a secondary profile too degraded to reach any conclusions. Now, we've since looked at that a couple of times with some other experts, and given the alleles that are present in that DNA, that's not Bob Crane either. So here we are with the idea that the blood is from Bob Crane, and we are getting nothing from Bob Crane. And that is really troubling. And I get into this in the book in depth in Who Killed Bob Crane, what may be going on and why, because this is really added to the mystery of this whole murder case. And Bob Crane's son, he openly gasped on TV when we revealed this because he was stunned. He thought, as I did, This is going to be his dad's blood in John Carpenter's car, case closed. And it just didn't come out that way.
It's amazing. So is a case like this solvable?
At this point, and the reason that the subtitle of the book is The Final Close-Up, that is not just a throwaway line. This is the last close-up forensically of this case, because to do this final round of testing, there was so little left that they had to consume everything that was left. There is no other DNA to test. We have consumed it all with this final test. That's why it's called The Final Close-Up.
Okay, you still believe that Carpenter did it?
Well, I have no other great theory. You're left with an absence of other possibilities. You don't have any other real strong evidence leading to someone else. But I'll tell you, there are a host of people out there at the zenith of Bob Crane's sexual addiction. Husbands, boyfriends, maybe even women who might have wanted their videotapes back, who might have been angry that this was going on. You can imagine. I mean, there'd be a pretty deep bench of suspects and people out there who were probably not happy with Bob Crane.
You went into this, the 18-year-old kid who is a big fan of Bob Crane, and then you get into it later. You meet the son. I'm sure he endeared himself to you. It sounds like you guys have a pretty good relationship.
He is a wonderful guy. I really like Bob Jr. a lot. He's a really great guy.
And then there's this, and you go through all of this. At the end of the day, what are you thinking about Bob Crane?
I'll tell you, it's very similar to how the investigators feel about it. It's tough to watch Hogan's Heroes now and not think about this because obviously, with among the evidence that I've seen are horrific pictures of the murder, pictures of his autopsy, a lot of this stuff in the book, Who Killed Bob Crane. It's hard to watch it the same way. I mean, I'm not looking at it anymore through the innocent eyes of an 18-year-old entertained by a really clever, glib, funny, sharp, quick-witted celebrity anymore. This is a guy who was definitely flawed. But we all have flaws, and it doesn't mean that you deserve to be murdered. And there's evidence that Bob Crane may have been trying to turn his life around toward the end. He was almost 50 years old. He was 2 weeks shy of turning 50 when he was murdered. And there's evidence that he was reflecting pretty heavily on where he was in his life. And, that he might have been turning the corner a little bit. It's hard to prove because the shenanigans continued into Scottsdale. So I'm not sure that he had made that turn yet, but he might have been approaching the corner at least.
And one might say, knowing who he was and what he had been doing, was he any better than the killer in a way? Nobody deserves to get killed. Don't misunderstand me. But this is a guy who's very troubled. There's a quote that I just thought was so fitting. I don't smoke, he said. I don't drink. 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
Well, you got to give him points for honesty,
right?
At least.
No, right? Absolutely. But I guess he never named the truth about himself, and he was clearly a dark guy fighting a whole lot of demons.
Yeah, I think with the sexual addiction, and I think it was probably a sexual addiction. I don't think there's any doubt about it. He filled up most of the empty space in his life with betting women. And I think he was videotaping it so that he would have a catalog of all of his escapades that he could reflect on later in life, have his own private pornographic stash, kind of, remember when, remember her. It would catalog it. I think that might have been what was driving a little bit of this, because I think Crane was terribly concerned that he might not be wanted as he got older. That, the Hogan star would fade and the public might not want him anymore. And I think that worried him terribly. I really do.
I've been speaking with John Hook, author of Who Killed Bob Crane, with a foreword by Robert Crane, Jr. For more information, visit whokilledbobcrane.com. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, a production of Resec, LLC. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show posts new podcasts Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern. Visit hallicasserjayne.com.